I feel like it's a problem with the camera, but it's not. It's a problem with my face.
Well, I was just about to say, my apologies for looking so tired, but I look so tired because I am.
I'm tired. I, on the other hand, have got the perfect face for podcasting.
Yes. Yeah, maybe season 3 we should reconsider YouTube videos.
Absolutely.
Well, sorry everyone, but Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Should we create a song?
I feel like I would be shit at it.
Yeah, me too. All right.
I mean, it won't stop us, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
well, Happy New Year, everyone. I hope
happy...
you had a lully Christmas.
Kate, skip the Happy New Year's because guess what?
What?
Happy season 3.
Happy season 3.
Don't even care about New Year. Happy
Don't
new
even care.
season.
3 is a good number for
3
me.
3 is the magic number. That's a song, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I have pretty much always lived at number 3.
What, the house number?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah. When I was born, I lived at number 3. And then when I was 1, we moved house and we moved to a different road, but number 3.
Yeah.
And
you live at number 3 now.
I live at number 3 now.
You do.
So yeah. So season 3.
Season 3. This is it.
Yeah. This is going to be great. I know we said this last year. And we did give
this time next year now.
This time next year we'll be millionaires. But no, this year I've got so many stories that are perplexing.
Yeah.
And most of you probably wouldn't have heard of them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because
and they're not murdery ones.
No.
They're like weird ones.
Yeah. I actually was thinking, coming into the new season, I really wanted to go back to some of the basics that we started with, come away from some of the true crime because we've been quite heavy on the true crime and start doing some of the really perplexing stories, the stories that we're all kind of like,
what about what
you can't really explain, and just episodes that really get you thinking. And this episode, although it's some form of true crime, it's not based on the episode, isn't about the true crime or the crime itself. But it is, to me, absolutely perplexing. And it is going to be quite a long episode. So I do want to kind of crack on a little bit, if that's all right with you. And random blams, go.
Would you like to go first?
I will absolutely go first.
Okay.
So my random blam is about the new year.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this really cute. And it is that in in Times Square when they do the ball drop New Year's, and then all the confetti comes out, and it's some form of like £3,000 worth of confetti or something that comes out.
Blimey.
They are actually people's wishes. They write on people write on like these slips, and then they put it in it's called wishfetti, and they put it in the wish wall in Times Square, and then it's that comes out as confetti.
That's really cute.
Oh no, it's really cute.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, my random blam might be a little bit less nice, but I've got Baba Vanga's predictions for 2025.
Who's Baba Vanga, please?
Oh, do you know what? I can't go into it really, but she's, I don't want to be like disrespectful, but basically she's a mystic. She's like
Mystic Meg.
Old lady. She's blind and she
sees the future.
she does. Her predictions have she predicted 9/11, she predicted World War II, she predicted Princess Diana's death.
Why haven't we done an episode on her?
Well, I might. Watch this space. You guys. Yeah, so Baba Vanga, she's got a good track record for being right. So her predictions there are many, but these are a few of her predictions for the year 2025. Sorry. She predicted a devastating war in Europe. She said that the year 2025 could be the defining year as the beginning of the end of mankind.
Oh, fucking hell, Baba.
I know.
Keep it hopeful.
Come on, Baba. Give us some good news. She said that there will be many alien encounters. So just for our listeners, I will be covering all of those. She said that telepathy would be a reality in 2025. She said there will be huge solar energy advances. Among many. Have you heard of Nostradamus?
Mm-hmm.
His predictions for 2025, he also said that there will be cruel wars in Europe.
There are already. So why that's not a prediction?
Well, he hasn't just said it.
No.
I've just said it.
Right. I thought he was like, right, coming into 2025, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's like
it's old news, mate.
As of 1st of January. No, this was some time ago. He predicted the end of the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Right.
This obviously he predicted this before there was a war between Russia and Ukraine. He said that 2025 will be the end of it. He said there will be natural disasters in Brazil. So for our listeners in Brazil, get your asses out of there.
Watch out.
He said that there will be a royal discord.
All right.
So there will be some kind of scandal
or
struggle.
Prince Harry.
Struggle with power leading to turmoil in the royal family.
Okay. Did either one of them say season 3 perplexed?
That was my last one, and they both said, if you haven't subscribed to Perplexed podcasts, what the fluff are you doing?
Yeah, you're missing out.
Yeah, you're missing out.
Missing out.
Also, just on that note, not subscribing, but for anyone listening to this episode, it's really helpful to us if you can just click follow.
Yeah, it
makes a big difference. So if you haven't already, can you just go on like your podcast app and just click follow? It doesn't cost you anything, but it's really, really helpful to us.
Yeah, it allows other people, it kind of boosts us up the rank, doesn't it? And it allows us to be a little bit more visible when people are searching for podcasts or for episodes in general. As reviews as well. If you leave us a review, especially on Apple Podcasts, doesn't take a second.
It sounds like something very insignificant, but it actually really, really, really helps us in more ways than you know. So yeah, if you haven't done that already, if you could please, that would be great. Thank you. Happy New Year. Love you all.
Yep. Random Blab's done.
I feel a bit hyper for this one, you know. I feel proper excited because I don't know what it is.
I am so nervous for this episode. I woke up this morning full of anxiety. I said to Josie, I was like, I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous for this one. Purely because, I do this with every episode, I want it to be as good as it can be, and I want to do it justice. And I don't know how I came across this episode. I think I was just listening to a podcast and I heard, no. I wanted to cover the theme of this episode. That's how it happened. Mm-hmm. So I was just looking up and I found a few different ones. And then I found this one and I was like, oh my goodness. So I listened to a couple of podcasts and I was like, this is awful. Absolutely awful. So then I spent every spare minute trying to get as much information as I could. And because I wanted to get all the facts out, you know, I wanted it to be as factual as possible. I didn't want to just take the information from another podcast or, you know, because I don't know where that podcast has got their information from. Yeah. So I wanted it to be as factual as possible. So it took me a long time, but I got every single bit of information about this. And I haven't included it all because the episode would be 24 hours long. But I've included a lot of it, all the important bits.
Nice.
Yeah.
I can't wait. Honestly, I've never heard of it. And I know you mentioned it when I saw you before Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really resisted like looking him up. Yeah, I have literally no idea what the story is, who he is, whether he's the aggressor, whether he's a victim. I don't know.
Well,
no, nothing.
Shall I tell you?
Yeah.
Let's go then.
All right.
Morning.
First morning of 2025. Morning.
First morning of season 3. All right. Right. I'd love to sit and chat with you, but I'm going to dive straight into this because it's going to be a lengthy one.
All right. I'll shut my face.
Yeah, shut your face. And just
let's shut our faces.
Put your seatbelt on and let's go.
Yeah. Consider our faces shut.
So this is the story of the shocking, horrific, abhorrent interrogation of Michael Crowe.
Goodness.
The evening of January 20th, 1998 in the Crowe household had been far from eventful. It was just a normal school night for the family. The Crowe family lived in a relatively large single-story 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood of Escondido in California. And it's a town that's name actually means hidden in Spanish because of its rural location. The Crowe family consists of Stephen Crowe, his wife Cheryl Crowe, and their 3 children.
Cheryl Crowe?
Yeah, Cheryl Crowe, yeah. And their 3 children. So 14-year-old Michael Crowe, 12-year-old Stephanie Crowe, and their younger sister, 10-year-old Shannon Crowe. And that week, Cheryl's mum, Judith, had also joined them for a couple of days. So they had quite a busy household. On the evening of the 20th of January, it was a full house. Stephanie and Michael had been home from school that day because they both had a cold. They both had a bit of a temperature, so they stayed home from school. And Judith had stayed home with them. So when Shannon got home from school and Stephen and Cheryl got home from work, the family just ate dinner together. And then Michael helped Stephanie with her math homework. There was a little bit of a debate about what to have on the TV that night. Not an argument, but just a children squabbling. And they all decided to watch Home Improvement. Michael and Stephanie laid on the floor together, sharing a pillow, while Shannon went off to watch something else on the TV in the bedroom that she was currently sharing with her grandmother, Judith. The kid's uncle, also named Michael, was at the house very briefly that evening, and he left around 8 p.m. And they said to him, just lock the door behind you when you go. Stephen then went to bed early, around 9 p.m. And to me, that's not early, but he fell asleep watching the TV, fully clothed on the bed. And then eventually, at some point that night, he got himself sorted and into bed. But the rest of the family said their goodnights and went to bed around 10 p.m. The following morning, the 21st of January, the Crowe house was silent until the beeping of Stephanie's alarm permeated the house at 6:30 a.m. The constant beeping of the alarm clock caught the attention of the grandma, Judith, and she laid in bed waiting for Stephanie to turn the alarm off so that she could just have a few more minutes to properly wake up. But the alarm continued to beep. So Judith pushed the covers of her bedding back. She chucked on her dressing gown and then, careful not to disturb Shannon, who was still fast asleep in her bed just a few feet away, she left the bedroom. She entered the hallway where all of the other bedrooms came off the hallway, and she walked just a few feet towards Stephanie's bedroom, and the beeping of the alarm clock growing louder and louder. Now, Stephanie's door was partially opened, and she could see that her light was still off. And just as she was about to push Stephanie's door all the way open and enter, her foot hit something solid on the floor. And she stepped back in shock and looked down and saw Stephanie lying in the partially open doorway. And she cried out for Stephen and Cheryl. She said Stephanie was lying on the floor, not moving, and she's covered in mud. Now, Stephen and Cheryl, they rushed out of their bedrooms and to their daughter. And it was immediately apparent that Stephanie was not covered in mud, but in dried blood. Oh. It covered most of her upper body and matted her hair. Stephen bent down to pick Stephanie up off the floor. She was ice cold and rigid. The house erupted into chaos. Screams, shouts, cries. Shannon and Michael emerged from their bedrooms, not knowing what was happening. And Stephen called 911.
What's the problem?
He laid on the floor, stop breathing. There's blood all over the place. Oh, we gotta help her. My daughter's dead.
Goodness.
When the ambulance and the paramedics arrived, they pried Cheryl off of her daughter. She'd been covering her body with hers the entire time, and she was sure that if she could just warm Stephanie up, she would be absolutely fine. Paramedics pronounced Stephanie dead as soon as they saw her. It was apparent that she had not died of natural causes and estimated her time of death to be sometime between 9 p.m. and 12:30 a.m. The police arrived soon after and immediately started to treat the family like criminals. They ushered the family into the front room and left an officer to watch over them to make sure that they did not talk to each other. 99% of homicides in the home are committed by someone inside the home. The immediate family first, and then it branches out. If it wasn't immediate family, then it would be a relative outside the home, then someone that knew the victim, someone Stephanie had met before. The very last person on the list of suspects would be a stranger. So the police locked down the crime scene. Stephanie's bedroom was a mess. Her bed was completely covered in blood. Her duvet was partially on the floor along with her body and also covered in blood. Her drawers had been tipped out. Books were strewn all across the floor. Her bedroom window was partially open to allow the phone cord to be run through it, and police noted it as a possible means of entry, but quickly dismissed it due to the undisturbed dust and cobwebs on a windowsill. Also on her windowsill, written in pencil, were the words "kill, kill." Stephanie had been stabbed 8 or 9 times while she lay in her bed, the duvet pulled up to her face in an attempt to defend herself. The stab wounds were concentrated on the upper half of her body, her chest, neck, and head, and she had some slice wounds to her ears and cheek. Once her attacker had fled, Stephanie had summoned the last amount of energy that she had in order to make her way out of bed, onto the floor, and she pulled herself along the carpet towards the doorway to get help before she eventually bled to death. Police noticed in Stephanie's hands were multiple hair fibres, and they took these for testing immediately, hoping that these would lead to her killer straight away. But they couldn't help but notice that they looked a lot similar to Michael Crowe's hair colour. He didn't seem quite as upset as the rest of the family. They say he was sat on the sofa, alone, playing a handheld game. Not quite the normal response to just finding out your sister had been murdered. The whole family were taken down to the police station and separated into different rooms to be questioned. And this did not sit well with Stephen. He begged the police to keep the children together with either their mum or their grandmother. They were upset and scared, and he didn't want them to be separated, but police refused. Just a few hours after finding his daughter dead, Stephen was sat in a police interrogation room being questioned. No, he didn't know anyone that would want to hurt Stephanie. She was a 12-year-old girl. No, he didn't have anything to do with her death. He loved her immensely. And no, he hadn't heard a single thing that night. He'd gone to bed before everyone, and that was all he knew. Judith always went round before she went to bed and checked that all the doors were locked, with the exception of the sliding doors in the parents' bedroom that was left unlocked. After questioning, police ordered Stephen to remove every item of clothing one by one so it could be photographed and bagged for evidence. and once completely naked, Stephen was photographed from every angle, police inspecting every part of his body for trauma or defensive wounds. They then chucked a pair of jockey bottoms and a t-shirt to him to put on while they bagged all his clothes for evidence. Each family member was questioned in the same manner. Cheryl stood naked, sobbing over the murder of her daughter as she held up an ID number and was photographed and inspected for any marks that may show that she had killed her own daughter. She, like Stephen, knew nothing. However, she did say that she had heard knocking or pounding while she slept, but she didn't get up to investigate and it soon stopped. Judith demanded the right to keep her bra on due to the fact that she wore a prosthetic breast after suffering from breast cancer and having to have a mastectomy. During Michael's interview, he told police how Stephanie and he had spent their last evening together, playing around in the front room, watching TV, helping her with her homework. He had been in his room when Stephanie had said goodnight and gone to bed, and he had gone to bed around the same time. At some point in the night, he had heard a pounding or knocking coming from somewhere, but it stopped soon after, so he didn't feel the need to investigate it. He then said he'd woken up at 4:30 a.m, put the TV on in his bedroom because it had a clock on it and it gave off some light. He'd walked out of his bedroom, past Stephanie's bedroom, and into the kitchen to get some Tylenol for his headache and a glass of milk. Michael had been off school unwell the day before and was still feeling rough. He said he got back into bed around 4:45 a.m. and went back to sleep and was awoken by the screams of his grandmother that morning. Michael was then photographed in his underwear, as was Sharon. After being at the police station for hours, exhausted and numb, all Stephen wanted to do was take his children home. And police informed Stephen that they were to stay at a motel because the house was being swept by forensics, and the children were being taken to the Polinsky Children's Center, which was a center for abused children that had been removed from their parents. Stephen was furious. He'd been told all along that they were free to go whenever they wanted. They wasn't under arrest. So he gathered up his family and decided enough was enough. He and his family were leaving. No sooner had they made their way through the station and towards the front door when police emerged from every nook and cranny, guns drawn, pointing at Stephen's chest, yelling at him, telling him to get back upstairs. It turns out they were not free to leave. Police informed Stephen that because of his outburst and uncooperation, he had now lost the right to say goodbye to his children before they were due to be taken away. Cheryl, however, was allowed to comfort Michael and Shannon, and she told them to trust the police. They were doing this to keep them safe and to find Stephanie's killer. They just needed to trust the police and do as they said. After all, they're the good guys. Michael and Shannon were taken from their parents due to the fact the police suspected them of murdering Stephanie and felt the children would be in danger had they been allowed to stay together. When Michael and Shannon arrived at the Polinsky Children's Center, they were told that they were due to be separated. Boys and girls weren't allowed to share a room. But they begged and pleaded to be able to stay together, and eventually the matron allowed them to sleep in the same room. Meanwhile, police began to gather everything from the home. They had all of the accounts now from the family of what happened that night, and they started trying to piece everything together. There appeared to be no forced entry into the house. There was no blood spatter anywhere else in the house apart from Stephanie's room. There was no blood on any of the family members, and there was no murder weapon. If someone outside of the home had done this, they would have had to sneak in through the sliding doors in the parents' bedroom, sneak past them while they were sleeping, wander around the house, and locate Stephanie's room. Police couldn't see how this was possible without waking up anyone else in the family. It had to have been someone inside the home, and detectives couldn't quite shake this uneasy feeling that they had of Michael Crowe. He hadn't appeared as upset as the others, and his story of waking up at 4:30 a.m. to get medicine and it taking 15 minutes didn't seem likely. He would have had to walk past Stephanie's open doorway, past her body twice. He must have seen something. They needed to take a closer look at Michael Crowe. Michael Crowe was your average 90s teenage boy. He loved playing video games. He liked reading Lord of the Rings. He liked playing role-play games. However, unlike your average teenager, he was incredibly smart. On most of his tests, he always scored in the 90th percentile. His high school teachers said that he could jump straight to college work if he applied himself. But Michael had been getting bored with the easy work at school and letting his grades slip. He was a bit of a loner. He liked to wear dark, baggy clothing. He had a few close friends instead of like a load of good mates. He wasn't into sports. He didn't go to church very often, unlike Stephanie, who attended regularly. If he could have stayed in his room all day, every day, playing his video games, he absolutely would have. So the day following Stephanie's murder, the 22nd of January, Escondido police turned up at the Polinsky Children's Centre and asked to see Michael. With Shannon begging Michael not to leave, police escorted him back to the station for further questioning. Detective Risley sits down with Michael in the small, whitewashed, windowless interrogation room. He reads 14-year-old Michael his Miranda rights and starts interrogation by asking him how he had slept. What had he had for breakfast? Was he feeling okay? Nice, simple questions. He asked Michael the same questions that he had done the previous day. No, he didn't know who killed Stephanie. Yes, he thought all the doors had been locked. He had heard a pounding at some point in the night, and he had gotten up at 4:30 a.m. for Tylenol. Detective Risley asks Michael more questions about him getting up in the night. After he had turned on his TV to see and left the room, had he left his door open or closed? And Michael thought that he'd left it open. His door was pretty much opposite Stephanie's room, and he asked Michael if Stephanie's door was open or closed. And Michael said he thought it was closed. Risley found it very hard to believe that if Michael had put a light on in his bedroom and left his door open, that he wouldn't have been able to see out into the hallway and have seen Stephanie's body. He found Michael's story inconsistent with what had taken place, but he didn't let on. Instead, he tells Michael that they have recovered a lot of evidence at the house and asks him what he thinks should happen to Stephanie's killer. He says, they shouldn't live. They don't deserve to live. And Detective Risley says, how come? And he says, out of everyone I know, she was the best person. She was kind. She cared more for other people than herself. If anyone had to die in this world, it definitely wasn't her. If they knew her and they killed her on purpose, they don't deserve any mercy at all. The interview lasts another 20 minutes, with Risley asking more questions about the family dog, about Michael and Stephanie's relationship. He tells Michael that Stephanie had some hair in her hands from either a struggle with her killer or something. And he says, the hair in her hands was not hers. Do you feel pretty confident that it's not going to be your hair? And Michael says, the only way it could be my hair is earlier we were playing around and tickling each other, but she never ripped any of my hair out. And the detective then asks him to elaborate about the tickling. Did they do that often? Where was the tickling confined to? Which areas of her body? Did it ever get out of hand? Did he ever pin her down, or did she pin him down? And he says, no, it was just fun. He would sometimes just tickle her on the neck and the stomach, and she was very ticklish. And detectives say, so I guess I hear you saying that the hair fibers that were in her hand could be yours? And he says, I really doubt it. She never reached up and ripped hairs out of my head. He then asks when he will be allowed to see his parents again. And the detective says he's not sure. If they are allowed down to the children's centre, I'm sure they will come. And he brushes off the comment and moves on to asking Michael about different friends Stephanie had. Once they end the interview and Michael is taken back to the Polinsky Centre, he told Shannon it was fine. The policeman was nice. He was just asking questions so that they could find out who had taken their sister away from them. Back at the police station, Detective Risley was discussing his thoughts on Michael. He was a very well-spoken, intelligent boy. Was he trying to cover his tracks by inventing a mystery person knocking on the door? Was he trying to act like he was too ill to have committed this crime by saying that he had to go and get Tylenol at 4:30? Risley didn't like the inconsistencies in Michael's story. Stephanie's door could not have been closed because she was lying partially in the doorway. Whoever committed this murder was calculating and smart. They had left no evidence behind. The police were stumped as far as collecting evidence in the house. The murder weapon was nowhere to be found. How and where could he have hidden it in the house that the police hadn't looked yet? They had literally taken walls apart. They had searched the sewers. They could not find it anywhere. Michael spent his time playing strategy games, planning and calculating his next move in order to complete the levels. They might not have the evidence to prove it yet, but they did have the use of Michael Crowe. Later that same evening, the 22nd of January, Michael is pulled away from Shannon again and is placed back into the windowless interrogation room, this time with a hidden camera. Outside the room, Detective Risley, alongside Detective Claytor and a psychologist called Dr. Lawrence Blum, had been brought in to watch Michael for any signs of distress, and they all stood and watched Michael. And Michael sits alone in the interrogation room. He's visibly upset and distressed. He's fidgeting. He looks worn out, like he's exhausted, and he keeps holding his head in his hands. He would hold in his tears until they literally burst out of him. And then he would try and get himself back together, back under control, and then burst into tears again. Detective Claytor enters the room. He reads Michael his rights again, and he makes sure that Michael understands each part. He asks Michael, how is he feeling? And Michael says he's feeling a bit sick. And I actually believe that he had bronchitis and a temperature at this point. But the detectives just say, well, if you need to stop, just say, and we'll stop. And Michael's like, no, I'm all right. Don't worry. He asks Michael why he thinks he's back in for questioning. And Michael's very unsure. He's already told the police twice already. He doesn't really see the point of going over it again. He's very clearly tired, very emotional, but Claytor presses on. He asks Michael to start from the beginning. And Michael recounts exactly the same story that he has already told twice. He heard pounding, it stopped, he got up to get a drink, and he went back to bed. That was all. So Claytor focuses on when he got up. How light was it? Could he see into the hallway? Could he see everyone's doors? Were they open or were they closed? And Michael says, I think they were closed, but I was half asleep, so I think they were closed. He asks Michael if there's any reason for his hair to be in Stephanie's hand. And Michael answers no. Now, Detective Claytor excuses himself from the room and tells Michael that he will be back in a minute. And he stands and watches Michael for a bit and then re-enters.
We're really trying to believe what you say. We want to believe what you say. Would you have any problems with taking a truth verification exam? None at all?
Yeah.
Do you act like there's a question?
And I told them before I leave mine.
What's the problem, Mike?
I spent all day away from my family. I couldn't see them. I feel like I'm being treated like I killed my sister. I didn't do it. It feels horrible.
So he asks Michael if he'll take the truth verification test, and he's like, absolutely, I'm not lying. I told you I'm not lying. And the detective presses him. You know, you act like you're disgusted. What's wrong? Why won't you take the test? And Michael's like, no, I'm going to take the test. You know, he's quite happy. He's been asking, actually, before all of this, he keeps saying, I'm not lying. You can test me. I'm not lying. And then he says, I feel like everyone's treating me like I've killed my sister and I didn't. And he's been kept away from his family this whole time. And Detective Claytor completely ignores the fact that he's saying, I haven't seen my family. He just, dismisses it. And he says, you need to trust me on this. This is going to work. What we're after, what's important is to get to the truth of the matter. We want to believe what you're telling us. He then leaves the room and stands outside watching Michael. He's very distressed. He's crying, but he just keeps trying to compose himself. And when Claytor eventually re-enters the room, he has with him Detective Chris McDonough. Chris McDonough's job here is to conduct the truth verification exam, which I'll go through in a minute. His job is to remain impartial, to ask the questions for the exam, and then to tell the other detectives the result of the exam. His job is in no way to interrogate Michael or to do anything. He needs to ask the questions, and that is all. The Claytor explains to Michael who Detective McDonough is and then leaves. So McDonough begins by asking Michael very easy, open questions. How are you doing, Mike? How old are you? Do you go to school? What's your favourite subject? What's your favourite thing to do? And Michael tells him that he's into computers. He loves to play the PlayStation. His favourite game is Final Fantasy VII. And McDonough spends a lot of time talking to Michael about this game. He's asking a lot of questions about the characters and the plot, and this conversation goes on for ages. And it's very clear that Michael is very passionate about this game, and he feels relieved to be talking about something other than did he murder his sister. He's very calm. He's very relaxed. And McDonough has got a son about the same age as Michael, so they're bonding. And the subject moves on to his family, and Michael tells him that they're a close family. He loves his mum and his dad. And he asks Michael, what does he like about his mum? What does he dislike about his mum? And he does this with each member of Michael's family until they get to Stephanie. And he says, tell me what you love about her. And he says, she was a real people person. She was more popular than I was, that's for sure. She had a lot more friends. She won awards. So she was just, I liked everything about her. And McDonough says, well, let's talk about the things that you didn't like about her.
What?
And Michael says, she could whine. And again, I like my family. I think I was blessed with a good family. I don't think there's anything that I don't like about Stephanie. McDonough continues talking to Michael, asking him the same questions the other detectives have already asked Michael. What did you do the night before? What time did you go to bed? When did you last see Stephanie? What time did you wake up? And Michael tells him exactly what he's already told the other detectives. His story never changes. He asks Michael what happened that morning, the morning that Judith found Stephanie dead on the floor. He starts asking Michael if he saw her body. How long did he look? What did she look like? How far away from her did he stand? Was she covered in blood? How much blood? Where was the blood? And Michael keeps saying, I only caught a glimpse of her because Mum was on top and I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see. McDonough turns the conversation back to the reason that he's been called in, the truth verification test. He says to Michael, he's just looking for the truth. And if Michael had nothing to do with it, then they can just rule him out and spend their time and energy looking for the killer. And Michael is only too happy for that to happen. And then McDonough says, on the other side of that coin, hypothetically speaking, taking into account that you're 14 years old, you're probably scared. Am I right? And Michael says, yes. And McDonough says, if, let's say, for example, my son were to have done something, hypothetically, which I know that he has done. For example, he's taken some candy out of a store before and he got caught. The hardest thing for him to do was to do what, do you think? And Michael says, admit it? And McDonough says, and sometimes that's difficult. It doesn't mean that the person is a bad person. Sometimes things get out of control, and sometimes, using my son, for example, he made a decision, okay, and that was wrong. And he goes into this really long monologue of doing something bad and then having to cover it with a lie and having to keep covering the last lie with another lie. And he tells Michael that every person has the capability of becoming an evil person and that we have to learn to suppress it and control it. He wants the truth from Michael. He says, otherwise, anything that he's keeping inside that isn't truthful will eat him up like a cancer. And he says, God, we've got science on our side. We've got technology on our side. They have forensic at his house right now, getting all the evidence. And the evidence doesn't lie. He says the worst thing that Michael could do was lie. And then the evidence show that he was lying, because basically that would be worse for him. He tells Michael that the instrument in front of them is going to make sure that Michael isn't telling a lie. He says that the machine is called a computer voice stress analyzer, CVSA for short. So let me tell you about the CVSA. It's very similar to a polygraph. It's easier to use and apparently more accurate. And I say apparently very loosely because it's a very controversial machine.
Yeah.
After it's been tested, it is less than a 50-50. It is less than a coin toss. It's a heap of shit, in my opinion. Haven't researched it. But what it does is it measures the fluctuation in the tone of voice used when answering questions. A normal tone voice gives off vibrations that look like a Christmas tree on the graph. However, when a person is lying and they're stressed, their vocal muscles tighten and the vibrations are less. So the results are not allowed to be used in court because they're so unreliable.
Mm-hmm.
So basically all this machine does is tells you when a person is stressed, not necessarily when they're lying.
Yeah, so everybody that does it is going to be under stress, aren't they?
Absolutely. However, McDonough has a boner for the CVSA and he tries to give this boner to Michael as well. And Michael's into computers and he says, you'll appreciate this, being into computers. And he explains all how it works. And then he says, seeing how you're into spy stuff, this was controlled by the government for a long time because it's so accurate. They used to use it to get moles out of government agencies because its accuracy rate is phenomenal. And Michael's super interested. What a cool piece of equipment. And he gets to use it. And what's even better is that McDonough tells Michael he is going to help formulate the questions that will be asked to him. Praise. And Michael knows he's not lying. He's eager to take this test and clear his name. So together they come up with the 15 questions that Michael will have to answer.
What are some things we want to learn here, do you think?
Yeah. If I did it, if I did it.
Okay, well let's do that then. Do you know who let's say took Stephanie's lie?
Them.
Okay, would that be a good fair question?
Yes.
Okay, do you know who took? Do you know how she died?
No.
He tells Michael to lie on some questions. Easy questions like, have you ever used a computer? Are the walls white? Michael was then asked to sign a waiver form. The waiver expressing that Michael knew he didn't have to take the test. Whether he understood that or not is a very different thing. But Michael signs the waiver form, waiving his rights. At the end of the day, Michael saw absolutely no reason that he shouldn't take this test to clear his name and end this continual, draining, intimidating questioning. So Michael takes the test, which lasts about 7 minutes. He's then left alone in the room while McDonough leaves to read the results. When McDonough returns, he sits back down in his chair and Michael wipes his face. He's exhausted. He's poorly. He's frightened. But he's a teenage boy and he doesn't want the detective to see him upset. And McDonough says, how are you doing there, son? Okay? And Michael says, yeah. And he tells Michael they're going to go over the results together. But first, he asks what he's thinking. What were his thoughts throughout this whole test? And Michael says, I don't know, nervous. And McDonough says, nervous? Okay, let's go over that. What were you nervous about? And he says, I don't know, that it might be wrong. It might say that I did kill Stephanie. And McDonough says, why would it say that? And he says, I don't know, because everyone's treating me like that. He says that he was once told that we're all suspects until proven innocent, and he feels like he's already been convicted. And McDonough says, but this machine doesn't know you, does it? It doesn't know anything about you. It doesn't even know your name. It doesn't know whether you've played on a computer or not. So if you're lying, it has no other way of telling other than science. And he tells Michael there are some things that they need to talk about before going over the results. What could those things be? And Michael says, I don't know. I've got no idea. And he says, come on, Michael, you're smart. What do you think we need to discuss? But Michael says, I don't know. So he goes through the results with Michael. He shows him what a truthful response looks like. And on the questions he was supposed to lie on, he shows them what the response looks like. Now it goes down to the question, do you know who killed Stephanie? And McDonough tells Michael that the results show he's being deceptive. He introduced to Michael the thought that perhaps his subconscious is blocking something out, something that he doesn't want to remember. And Michael says, no, I don't have a clue why it would say that. That really upsets me. It's wrong. I don't know why it would say I was lying, because I was being truthful. And he's absolutely bewildered by the results, and you can hear it in his voice. He is shocked to hear the computer. This computer that has been guarded by the military because of its accuracy is showing that he's lying. And he's shocked to hear from McDonough that his subconscious mind could be blocking him from remembering something that he doesn't want to remember. McDonough asks him what he's afraid of. And Michael says that he's afraid that he's going to be blamed for something that he didn't do. And he keeps telling Michael that if he needs to let go of anything that he's got inside of him, that he should. He tells Michael he can see something inside him that's about ready to burst out. He tells Michael that it would be better for Michael to fess up before they find the evidence, because they will find the evidence. And Michael is just sobbing. He keeps telling McDonough there's nothing inside him. He can't answer the question because he doesn't know the answer. But McDonough keeps pressing him. He tells Michael, hey, we don't just pick a person at random and say, that guy did it. They lean on the evidence. All the evidence they have collected so far. And wouldn't it be better for Michael if he told his story first before the evidence caught him in a lie? And Michael says, I don't know, because I don't know.
I don't know what to say.
McDonough says, you don't know what? He says, I don't know. I don't know why it's saying I lied on the questions. I really just don't know. It makes no sense to me. And he's exasperated, and he just keeps repeating, I don't know. I don't know. Every time they ask him, I don't know, because he just doesn't know. And Michael's got his head in his hands. He's utterly bewildered. But McDonough keeps looking at him, and he says, what if it's your hair? And Michael says, it couldn't be. But Michael, I'm just saying, what if it is? Then what? And he says, I don't know. I don't know. What if they come back and say to you, Michael, we have your hair, and it's in, where did you say it was again? And Michael says, I don't know. They said it was in her hand.
Maybe there's something we need to understand about Michael and about your sister that we didn't understand, and maybe somebody could have helped. It's okay. It's okay to feel the way you feel.
I really,
Okay,
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know why I'd say that. I swear to God, I don't know.
I'm looking at you right now, okay? And inside you're about ready to burst. We can't bring her back. She's gone. Okay? You're fighting it. You're
I don't know what to do anymore.
I understand.
I'm being told that I'm lying.
I'm not saying, Michael, I'm not saying that. Have you heard me say that? What if they come back and say to you, they say, Michael, we have your hair in her hand. And all of a sudden, you go, now what? I mean, what are you going to do at that point? I mean,
at that point, I would have to completely blanked out and if that's how I get. Because I don't know.
Hypothetically. Could that have happened?
No, not that I know of.
Not that you know of.
Like I said, I would have to be completely unaware of it.
Okay. Have you ever blacked out before?
No, never.
Okay, I believe you. I believe you.
If I knew who did it, you would know. Everyone would know right now.
Okay, boy.
I just whoever did it, if I ever find out, he took forever. I love Sue. Unless there's small baby.
So McDonough goes over the results with Michael again, to show that he must know something, and you can hear in the audio that Michael he can't believe it. I can't believe it. It shouldn't be right. It can't be right. And he says, I wish I knew, but I don't. And I don't know why it's saying that, because I told the truth on every question. And McDonough says, and Michael, he says, now I've really lost everything if I can't believe what I believe myself. And this is really the start of Michael second guessing himself. And McDonough says that he's going to take a break. And he asks Michael if he would like some tissue, which he does desperately. He's been distraught throughout the entire questioning so far. And even when Detective Claytor enters the room a while later, he asks to get Michael some more tissue. Claytor is a bad cop in this situation. He strolls in and says, listen, I've spoken to McDonough about the results. We don't need to discuss them further. We know what that's about. And he says, we've got technology on our side, we've got science on our side in the form of evidence. We can match that hair via DNA. We've done it loads of times before.
You know, there's a lot of blood. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. You mean stay with me, Michael. It's very difficult for the person who did it not to get blood on them.
Yeah.
Okay. And not to transfer that blood to other parts of the house.
Yeah.
We found blood in your room. Well, maybe.
God.
Stop. We use processes called.
Where'd you find it?
Pardon me?
Where'd you find the blood?
I'm sure you know.
What? God, I don't know. I shouldn't do it. Just where is that?
Does that mean you can't tell me about the night?
Yeah. What are we talking about?
Okay.
What are we talking about?
You're 14?
Yes.
You got your whole life ahead of you, don't you?
Yeah. God. Oh, God. I supposed to get us.
Why? You tell me.
Jim, why are you doing this to me? If I did this, I don't remember it. I don't remember the film.
And you know what? That's possible.
Jeez.
I'm sure that you've got a lot of questions about that, but he tells Michael, we've found blood in your room. And Michael says, where did you find it? And I don't know if you heard, it kind of catches Claytor off guard. And he says, I'm sure you know.
Yeah. Now,
the reason that this catches Claytor off guard is because there is no blood found in Michael's room. It's a complete lie. Detectives can see that Michael was starting to crack. So they had to plant this idea that perhaps Michael had committed this crime but blocked it out, and they needed something to push him over the edge. So police are allowed to lie in interrogation. They're allowed to say whatever they want.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
Yep. They're allowed to say whatever they want to gain a confession, as long as they stay within the confines of the law, which are, they must read him his rights. If he asks to stop, they must. If he asks to see his parents, they must. So Claytor says that within the blood are fingerprints which are being analysed at this very moment, and that they know who committed Stephanie's murder. And he says to Michael, we can't bring her back, but we can do the right thing by Stephanie's name, by yourself, and by your parents. Now, there are a couple of things that we need your help with that only you're going to be able to help us with. And he says, what I'd like to do, right off the bat, rather than put our team through any more, can you tell me what you did with the knife? And you heard him in the audio, and he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I swear to God, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, you're 14. You've got your whole life ahead of you. And this is a little bit later on in the audio. Michael then says, I don't know if I do anymore. Claytor tells Mike that he's made a mistake, but it doesn't make him a bad person. He just needs to own up to that mistake. But Michael just keeps saying, I didn't do it. And you heard him in the audio. He says, why? Why are you doing this to me? And he says, if I did do this, I don't remember. And Claytor says, well, you've gone from I didn't do it, I couldn't have done it, to I don't remember. And Michael says, I know, but that's why I couldn't have done it. I would think I would remember this. I mean, if I did do it, I don't remember. Claytor tells Michael that he needs to face this head on and confess now rather than later. Otherwise, he won't be able to live with himself. And Michael says, how can I live with something that I don't even know that I did, if I did it? And Claytor says, just look at the evidence, Mike. We have inconsistencies. The evidence shows that Stephanie's door couldn't have been closed at 4:30 when you got up. So you must be lying about that. The evidence shows that the hallway would light up when you opened your bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The evidence can't be argued with. He says, what happened is no longer the issue. Now they need to know why it happened and how that they're going to get through this. So that's all this is about now. We need your help to get through this. And Michael says something to Claytor, which is, you can't quite hear it. And even on the transcript, it just says unintelligible. And Claytor asks him to repeat it. And Michael says, I think I'm going to throw up. Oh. And he just keeps repeating that he didn't do it. And at one point, every other word, he's just saying, God, why? I didn't do this. And why are you doing this to me? I didn't do this to her. I couldn't. I can't believe myself anymore. I don't know if I did or not. I don't know. I don't think I did this. I don't remember it. And Claytor says, you know what? That's possible. After hours of being interrogated, lied to, and manipulated into believing that he'd killed his own sister, Michael was finally starting to believe it. He asks Claytor what's going to happen to him, even though he doesn't know if he did it. Does anyone know what's going to happen to him? And Claytor says they will try and do everything that they can to help him. And Michael is absolutely devastated at this point, and he says, I don't know what's going on anymore. I don't know. What am I supposed to tell everyone? He says, what am I supposed to tell people? That I didn't know I did it? Somehow I've killed my sister. How am I supposed to do that? He says, I can't do that. And the most heartbreaking sentence is Michael asking, are you sure? Are you sure I did this? And Claytor says, I'm sure about the evidence. And there is absolutely no evidence so far that suggests Michael committed this crime. The police have no murder weapon. They have no forensic inside the house. Absolutely nothing to go on. All they have is a 14-year-old boy on the verge of a breakdown, which they have induced.
Yeah.
And Claytor keeps telling Michael, we know you didn't mean for this to happen. We know you didn't mean for things to turn out this way. And he says, you really didn't mean for this to happen, did you? And he says, I don't know. I don't even know what I did. I don't even know what happened. I've been told I did this awful thing, but I don't remember. And he's obviously visibly distressed. The psychologist continues to watch from outside the room. And Claytor asks Michael if he would like a drink. And he refuses. And he says, I don't deserve anything. And Claytor leaves the room and leaves Michael in this horrifically distressed state.
Blimey, that is distressing. He's having a breakdown.
And he says to himself, God, why? Why? Oh, God. And he says, I don't deserve life. I don't want to live. I can't believe this. How could I have done this? He just keeps repeating, God, why? God. And McDonough enters the room and Michael just looks at him and says, how could I not remember doing something like that? And he offers Michael some more water and he says, I wish I could get you some water or something. And Michael says, I just want answers. So McDonough talks to Michael for a little while and he ends up saying, if the test on the hair comes back and it's your hair, and Michael suddenly perks up a little bit and he says, well, they don't know yet. And McDonough seems to kind of realise that he's created this bit of hope in Michael and he needs to squash it out straight away. And he tells Michael, I haven't completely talked to them yet. It might be back. I haven't really talked to them yet. And Michael says, I want to know. I want to know for sure. He gets Michael a drink and tells him to drink some and try to relax. He tells Michael that he won't be going to prison tonight, but he asks what he's afraid of. And he says, I'm afraid of myself.
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of person could do something like that and not remember. The interview lasts a while longer with McDonough playing good cop and he's trying to get Michael to calm down, trying to get him to relax and trying to open him up. And he says to him, it's better to come clean now. If he's not willing to tell the other investigators, then he can tell him. You know, you can tell me. If you don't want to tell Claytor, you can tell me. And at the end of the interview, McDonough asks Michael if he's all right. And Michael says, I don't think I'll ever be all right again. They end the interview and Michael is taken back to the Polinsky Children's Centre and left to think over all the things that he's been forced to believe about himself. The next morning, he's taken back to the police station for some more questioning and he's faced with Detective Risley. He asks Michael, how is he doing? And Michael tells him he's hardly slept. He couldn't eat a single thing. His stomach is hurting. He feels like he's got a temperature, but no one is checked. Risley is good cop. He tells Michael, if there's anything you need, then just ask. He talks to Michael for a while about anything and everything really that has nothing to do with why he's there. Just subjects that are going to make him relax and let his guard down again. And they then get onto the subject of why he's there again. Risley tells Michael he would much rather be talking about all the other subjects than the subject that they need to talk about. And he asks Michael how he's feeling. And Michael says, last night was the worst I've ever had. And Risley says, why is that? And Michael says, have you ever had any of your siblings killed? And Risley answers no. And then the phone rings. He steps out. And Detective Claytor steps back in. Now, at this point, Michael has had no support about the fact that his sister has been killed just days earlier. So not only is he still struggling with that fact, he's got all of this interrogation on top. And now Detective Claytor steps into the room I can only imagine what Michael must be feeling now. This is the man that told him that he had killed his own sister. He's an intimidating figure, and he doesn't care to talk to Michael as anything other than a suspect. He tells Michael he's spoken to someone from the Polinsky Children's Centre, and he understands that Michael has got some questions. And he says, I'm happy to answer your questions, but I also have questions. And for you to get answers to your questions, you need to answer mine. So he says, Michael, what's the question? And Michael says, I want to know why they think it's me. Why do they think that I did this? And Clayton says, well, the evidence leads us to believe that. Now it's time for my question. Why do you think that the evidence leads us to believe that? And Michael says, I don't know. I didn't do it. The evidence shouldn't lead you to that. And Clayton says, I know it shouldn't, but it does. And that needs to be addressed. And Michael just keeps saying, but I didn't do it. So Claytor changes tactics a bit. He starts talking to Michael about his games. He says, let's approach this like you're a character in a game. You've got to get from point A to point B, and you've got 2 paths to go down, and you have to choose one of them. His words to Michael are, I'm not out to defeat any nemesis. What I'm out to do is I'm out to solve a problem, solve a puzzle, if you will. What I want you to do for me is put yourself in my position. Each turn of the road is a question that needs to be answered. Each piece of evidence that I run into has to have an explanation, or there has to be an explanation too. Put yourself in my place and answer some of these questions. What are you going to do in the face of this evidence? You tell me which direction you want to take. And Michael says, what evidence, though? No one's told me. And Clayton says, I think I did. Think about it. And Mike says, well, they said they found blood in my room, but I don't know anything about it. But Clayton doesn't want to hear it anymore. He says, I don't want to hear, I don't know anymore. He tells Michael that as the game character, he is faced with the evidence of blood in his room. And for them to move on, they need to have an explanation as to why there is blood. Which, if you remember, there isn't. Clayton knows this, but is forcing Michael to come up with an explanation as to why. But Michael keeps repeating, I don't know anything about the blood in my room. I don't know how it got there. All I know is they've said they found blood in my room. That's all I know. But Clayton gets stern and he tells Michael the rules of the game. You asked me a question and I answered it. I expect one in return. And Michael says the only thing that he can say, I don't know. So Clayton creates a new rule to the game. He tells Michael he can't cop out. Saying I don't know is now not an option in this game. The rules have to be followed. You can't ignore the evidence. You can't bypass it. So tell me, how did the blood get in your room? So just put yourself in Michael's shoes for a minute. You're 14 and you're faced with this unimaginable situation. You know, if someone told you that they found blood in your room from a murder and you had to give an explanation as to how it got there, what would you do? Even as an adult,
there's nothing you can do, is there?
I can't conceive an explanation as to what you would do in this situation.
No.
So Michael says, I know what you think, and I also know that it isn't right. So what am I supposed to do? Yeah. How am I supposed to tell you an answer that I don't know? I can't. It isn't possible to tell you something that I don't know. But Clayton is a very good interrogator. He knows how to handle this. He asks Michael, is it an impossible mission to win games? Is it possible to win the game? Yes. Is it possible to vanquish your foes? Yes. So how can you tell me it's not possible? And Michael just breaks down in tears and he's like, why are you doing this to me? And Clayton pauses and says, right, take some deep breaths, calm yourself down and answer this question. If you could be doing anything in the world right now, what would you be doing? And Michael says, I'd be at home with everyone alive. And I'm not being blamed for things that I didn't do. I'm not being asked questions that I can't answer. This nightmare hasn't started. No one's forcing me to answer questions that I can't because I don't have the answer. And Claytor talks to Michael for a few minutes, trying to calm him down because he's very upset, very distressed. He talks to him about his family, about different things. And this goes on for a while until Claytor steers it back when he feels that Michael is a little bit calmer. He says, right, let's stick to the rules of the game. I answered your questions. Now you have to answer mine. We have to have an explanation for the evidence. You can pick which piece of evidence you give an explanation to, but they all need answers. So pick one. And Michael says, the only piece of evidence that I know about personally is when I woke up and got Tylenol, and that is all I know. And he starts getting upset again. He says, I can't take this. Everything I do, you don't believe me. Everything. You don't believe a thing I'm saying, do you? You think I'm lying. I can't take this. The phone rings in the interview room and Claytor answers it. He tells Michael he needs to go out and speak to someone and then leaves. And Michael is left alone in the room. He's got no idea he's being recorded. And he says, he just sobs into his hand and he says, I hate this place. I want out of here. Oh God, I want to see my family. Meanwhile, everyone else is listening to the things that he's saying. Detective Risley enters the room and he calms Michael down. They talk for a while about home life, about school, about his friends. They talk about all the things that are good about Stephanie, all the things that Michael loves about her. Michael mentions that he has 2 friends at school, Joshua, who is his best friend, and Aaron, who is a close friend, but they had recently fallen out. He mentions that at one time in school, they had both said some nasty things about Stephanie, but Michael, being the good older brother that he was, he stood up for her against them. But the mention of 2 other names catches the detective's attention, and he mentally puts a pin in it. And he starts telling Michael that everyone just needs to understand what happened to Stephanie, because no one is going to be able to forgive Michael unless they're first able to understand what and why this happened. He tells Michael that forgiveness and understanding come hand in hand. You don't get one without the other. He tells Michael his parents will never forgive him unless they understand. He says, once everyone understands, I know they will forgive you, Michael. But Michael sticks with the truth as he knows it. And he tells Risley that he didn't do it. And Risley lands a devastating blow. And he says, you know, the good part of Michael didn't do it. The part that helped Stephanie with her homework. I'm suggesting to you that the Michael that has an opponent to defeat, who has an incredible assortment of things at his disposal, could be responsible for this. And Michael's whole demeanor falls and he says, are you telling me that I did do this? And Risley continues to elaborate on this 2 different Michaels that live within him. Detective Claytor enters as well and joins this barrage of manipulation. They talk to Michael about his favourite game, Final Fantasy, where it turns out that at the end of this game, the main character thought he remembered something, but it turned out that he was wrong, and the memory was wrong. So Claytor uses this to ask Michael if he thinks that our memories can deceive us. If there are things that we can do that our memories won't allow us to remember. So together, the detectives work hard to implant the idea that to Michael that there is another part to him that committed this crime. A good Michael and a bad Michael. The bad Michael killed his sister and the good Michael doesn't remember. They tell Michael that this was an unconscious act, something that happened and he wasn't even aware that it had happened.
You're right, it's unconscious, but if I'm the good Michael right now, then the other is completely submerged. I can't remember.
So Michael starts to believe that this is true. He says that if this is true, then it's a terrifying thought because he doesn't even know that this bad Michael exists. This bad Michael would have had to completely taken over to have killed his sister. And he says to the detectives, if this is true, what will happen to him? And they tell him that they need to bring these two Michaels together so that he can remember what happened and help everyone understand so that they can forgive him. They ask him questions about the murder that he still cannot answer. And he flits between saying, I didn't do it, to saying, I don't remember doing it. They tell him that he must follow the rules of the game. And he can't. He says, I don't know, I can't. And they ask him to use his imagination. Have a guess what happened. What do you imagine happened? And Michael is bawling and he says, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to imagine it. And they ask him to think about the bad part of Michael. What would the bad part of Michael have done to Stephanie? They asked him, how did Stephanie get from the bed to the floor? Michael says he doesn't know, but that's not the rules of the game. So he says, she was moved. And they say, okay, how would you have accomplished that physically? And he says, I don't know. I picked her up. I don't know. And they say, is that possible? It's like, I guess it could be possible. But you told me. I don't remember. Now he's really upset and distressed, but the detectives don't have any sympathy or patience left. And they press him further on this and he breaks down. He can't say, he just starts saying, I can't remember, but stops. And he says, if it is true, there is another side to me. I don't know it. And they take a small break to allow Michael to compose himself. Claytor asks Michael, in his current situation that he was facing, what is his greatest fear? And he says, I'm afraid that there is someone else inside of me. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they do. If what you're saying is true, then it's like there's another person in me, and I don't remember anything. He says that he's afraid he'll be locked up for the rest of his life for something that he can't remember doing. And Claytor says, don't worry. We can help you. The system works in two ways. If we have to prove that you've done it, and we will, the punishment is worse. But if you help us out, if you cooperate with us, then we'll cooperate with you. They start talking off topic, but about Michael's other fears. He says he's afraid of dying, but knows that he'll go to heaven because he accepts God. And Claytor asks if he thinks Stephanie will be in heaven. And he says, absolutely. She loves God. So Claytor says, so that means you'll see her again then in heaven. How do you feel about that? And Michael says, if I did it, I hope she will forgive me. And Claytor says, well, why do you feel that you need her forgiveness? What for?
For God's sake.
And he says, well, you're telling me I did this. If I really did kill her, like you said, it would hurt me forever, for eternity, if she didn't forgive me. He tells detectives that he wishes he could remember more so that he could help them out. For the next minute, the detectives go back and forth with Michael, asking him to recount what he did, what her body felt like when he picked her up, how heavy was she? And every single time he says, I don't know, I can't remember. If I did do this, I just can't remember. Back and forth, continually asking him how he moved her, what he did in those 15 minutes that he said he had gone to the kitchen. And he tells them that he doesn't remember any single details, and that if he did do it, his subconscious is blocking it out. And he asks detectives if he's sure that Michael did it. He needs to know. He says, tell me if you're sure that I did this. And Risley just says, I'm sure that what the evidence says. And Michael says, so does the evidence say that I did it? Are you sure? And detective says, well, why do you think we're talking to you? So they circle back to Michael saying earlier that he wanted to ask for Stephanie's forgiveness. They tell Michael to write her a letter. This way, he's going to be able to get some things off his chests, things that that he wanted forgiveness for. So they leave Michael alone for the next 24 minutes while he writes his dead sister a letter.
Jesus.
Right. Bear with me, because this is hard. This is really hard to read. Dear Stephanie, I'm so sorry that I can't remember what I did to you. It's almost like I'm being convinced of this more than really knowing it. I will always love you and can still remember you in life. You have always given me so much. You truly must be an angel. I tried to be as loving as possible to you. I'm still crying for you, and I pray to God that you forgive me for what they say I did. Sometimes I think it would be better if I could remember, but I don't want to try. The fact that I can't remember is a blessing from God. I only want to remember the way you were when you were with us. I hope you love me forever and that I never forget what you were, a truly loving person. They are putting me through hell, and I think that's what I deserve. I will always hold you dear to my heart. If I did this, I am insane. I hope both you and God will forgive me. We all miss you, and I feel I am being ripped from everything I know. I never meant to hurt you, and the only way I know I did this is because they say I did, and I hope you understand. I don't know what I was thinking. I hope I never remember, because I don't think I could forgive myself if I knew what I did. I want you to know that I was not myself when I did it. They want me to help them, but I can't. I feel because of that I am letting you down. I should help you, but I simply can't. If you don't forgive me, then I understand. You showed me what God could do for you, and now I have accepted him myself. I shall one day see you in heaven, and I hope that I shall have an eternity to serve you for this. Never forget that I always loved you. Michael.
There's not one bit of this that isn't tragic.
Once he was finished writing, the detectives take the letter and examine it. They then proceed to grill Michael about the contents of the letter. They tell him he's lying. He does remember. He just doesn't want to fess up. And they keep hounding him with possible scenarios that could have happened, trying to get him to remember. And they say they're going to try and jog his memory.
God. Go on. It's a blessing that I can't remember. Please don't make me.
And you can hear Michael's pleading with them. He says, please, if I did do this, I don't want to remember. Please don't make me remember. It's a blessing that I can't remember. And he flits again between saying it wasn't him to saying I don't remember. The interrogation transcript makes for a heartbreaking reading, and I wish that I could include every single thing that was said in this interrogation to completely convey the hopelessness that Michael felt, the manipulation that the detectives used for Michael to believe that he killed his sister, that there was no other possible conclusion, that they had this mountain of evidence against him. They tell Michael that it had to have been someone in their house. So who did he think it was if it wasn't him? Was it his little sister? Was it his mum? Was it his dad? And no, he said to all of those, they all loved Stephanie and would never hurt her. And he tells detectives, it must have been me. It must have been, because it couldn't possibly have been anyone else in that house. The detectives asked him to repeat what he says. And he says, I don't want it to be anyone else in my family. I don't want to believe that. I don't want it to be me. But you say the evidence points towards me. I don't know what to do anymore. I can't remember. You're asking me questions I can't answer. I can't answer questions if I don't remember anything. I just want to see my parents, my family, and apologise to them. I don't remember doing this. They talk to Michael some more about helping them out so that they can help him out. And he says, I wish I could. I wish I could tell you what you want to hear. I just can't. He says if he was going to try to help himself and tell them what they want to hear, it would be a lie. And then when the evidence comes back, it wouldn't match up. And then things would be worse for him because he's lied. He says, if I told you right now, if I went through and told you a whole story about how I killed her, the evidence would prove I'm wrong on almost everything except that it was done by a knife. And Claytor says, let's try that.
Oh, for God's sake.
And Michael says, well, I'd have to make up a story. I take full responsibility for it. If you're saying I did this, then I must. But I just don't remember doing it. So now he's saying, I believe you. I believe that I did this. I can't tell you how, though, because I don't know. I don't remember. But I believe you. that it was me that did this. The interview has been going on for about 4 hours now, and Claytor is getting impatient, and it is showing. He's very short with Michael. He keeps telling him to look at him, not on the floor, pay attention, stop looking down, look at me. And when Michael starts crying, he tells him to stop. He says, theatrics won't work. The pace of the interview picks up, and you can, reading the transcript, you can feel it. You can feel the intimidation in the transcript, and it's a horrible thing to read. And he keeps telling Michael, you need to come forward. You need to go down the right path. No ifs, no buts. You need to come clean. And they're really laying this pressure on. He says things like, let's hear it, Mike. Time's ticking. Once the evidence is in, there's no going back. You need to choose what path you're going down. And eventually Michael says, it's like, I've got this overwhelming feeling that I did kill her. But I don't know why I feel that way. All I know is for some reason, I can feel that I killed her, but I don't know how. But this isn't good enough for the detectives. He starts ranting on about hollow words not being enough. He says, this is why we're still here. This is why this is a nightmare that doesn't seem to be going away for you. This is why we've reached this point of no return. It's because sorry said isn't sorry until sorry said is done. It's hollow words, Mike. I don't want to hear hollow words. The system that you're facing isn't going to accept hollow words. Stephanie and Stephanie's memory is not going to accept hollow words. Mike, you're in control. Prove to me, not with hollow words, but prove to me that you can take a step and you can take a definitive step towards helping yourself in this situation. All you have to do is show me proof. Show me the proof that you want to go in this direction, and you have my personal guarantee that the help you need is going to be forthcoming. This is what the system is geared for. The system cannot do that with your hollow words and your selective memory and some overwhelming feeling.
Yes.
And you have my personal guarantee that the help you need to accept this is going to be forthcoming. That is what the system is geared for.
I want to go down that path.
No. Cut it out. Cut it out, Mike. Cut it out.
Just get out.
The reason I'm sounding impatient, Mike, is the 11th hour is rapidly approaching. All this evidence is going to be in. Put a rush on some things that, quite frankly, is going to bury you, my friend. And you need to head that off at the pass. You need to take the step over here first before you're hit with this avalanche.
So just remember, there is no evidence. Okay. So Michael has been given absolutely no way out. His hope has been completely extinguished and replaced with two options. One that is marginally better than the other. One that has a small glimmer of hope. But the only way to get that is to accept what the detectives have been telling him all along. He killed Stephanie. So Michael asks, what's the worst thing that could happen to him in this situation? And they respond with, the worst thing that could happen is to choose the wrong path. The one path you can be locked away for a considerable amount of time. And the other path, we can see what we can do to help you live with this. They talk to Michael about what it's like to be in prison, trying to scare him into accepting this second path. And Michael says that someday he hopes he can tell them what happened, but he just can't. And at that point, the phone rings and Claytor answers it. He hangs up and says, time's up, Mike. These people are rushing me. You've got to do it now. Tomorrow's not going to work, because the reality is, if it doesn't come up tonight, it's never going to come up. And Michael says, if I tell you tonight, it won't be true. And the detectives say, tell us then. Tell us a story. And Mike repeats the fact that if they want a story of what happened to Stephanie, it's going to be made up.
But it won't, I'll lie. I'll have to make it up.
What's the story, Michael?
That night, I was there. Shit could stick it. We're okay. So, I got a knife. Wait, you know,
Yeah, but
did I stab you?
how many times did you stab her?
Say you lie 3 times. I told you
Well,
to
tell me what
lie.
the truth is.
Yeah, what is the reason for trying to lie here? Because you presented me with 2 paths. One, I am just definitely afraid I'd rather die than go to jail.
Okay, true. Where'd you get the knife?
I feel like
What did you do with the knife afterwards?
I don't know what I do with the knife.
Give me some of these details.
I don't have...
Not your hollow line.
And Michael said from the beginning, this is going to be a lie. All of this is going to be a lie. And they say, how many times did you stab her? And he says, this is a lie. It's 3 times. Because, you know, detectives know that she wasn't stabbed 3 times. And the only reason that Michael knows that she was stabbed was because detectives said to him she was stabbed. Otherwise, he didn't know that she'd been stabbed. And Claytor is pretty annoyed. You can hear him in the interview. He's, you know, tell us the truth then. Stop lying. Tell us the truth. He tells Michael, you know, don't insult my intelligence. He tells Michael if he wants to play that game, then they'll take him back to the Polinsky Children's Centre. And then when the evidence comes in tomorrow, he's going to go down the more difficult path. And Michael seems a little bit shocked about having the option to go back to the Polinsky Children's Centre, because I think that he feels that he's going to prison tonight. And he's thinking, oh, I'm allowed back to the Children's Centre. Great. But Michael says, I know I did it. I just don't know how. And I can't tell you what I don't know. And then they start asking him again about what he did with the knife. And he says, I don't know. And then at this point, Michael's like, just take me back to the Polinsky. I can't tell you. I'm sorry. And Risley says, so you've chosen then? And Michael just says, I guess. Detective Risley and Claytor escort Michael out of the room, away from the cameras and the recording. And they're outside for a few moments with Michael before they return back inside. His demeanour has visibly changed. What little fight he had left in him is now completely gone. What happened outside that room is not documented in police files.
I bet it's not.
Because they told Michael that his parents weren't coming back for him. They believed that he had killed Stephanie and wanted nothing to do with him.
Oh, God.
They had told detectives that they didn't want to see him. And it completely broke Michael. They told Michael that all he had left now were the detectives, and it was only them that could help him if he was just willing to help them. But the truth was, Michael's parents didn't even know the police had been questioning him for the last 3 days. They thought he was safe at the Polinsky Centre with Sharon. They were completely clueless as to the ordeal their son was currently going through. But Michael goes back into the interview room that he'd just come from minutes earlier. His persona is completely different. The way that he talks is different. He starts telling the detectives all about his sibling rivalry that he had with Stephanie, how he hated her for always trying to be better than him, how his parents were harder on him than they were on her, how she was popular at school and had all the friends, the popular girls, and Michael was incredibly jealous of her. He tells them he was constantly having to compete with Stephanie. If he'd done something well, then she would do it better, and he hated that. His parents would replace schoolwork of his that was hung up on the fridge with Stephanie's schoolwork. He said he often got angry and would retreat inside himself, and when he did that, he could never remember what he did while he retreated. He says he got the rage that night that Stephanie died. He had one of these episodes where he retreated inside himself, and when he woke up, Stephanie was dead.
I'm positive I killed her. And she was like a threat to me. Everything I did, she could match. That wasn't right. Every time I was going to be in the spotlight, she grabbed it right away from me. The few times I was going to win something, she had to go ahead and win something even bigger. She made me feel worthless.
Can you hear the difference in his tone of voice?
Yeah. He sounds almost bolshy now.
Yeah. It's like, if this is, you know, this is the only way I'm going to get help. This is what I'm going to tell you. And, you know, it can't be a lie because they know when he's lying. So he's basically telling them what they want to hear.
Yeah.
But he was still unable to answer questions like, what knife did he use? What did he do with the clothes that he was wearing when he killed her, he was still unable to give accurate details that would suggest that he actually did kill Stephanie. He knew she was stabbed with a knife, and that's because the police told him that she was stabbed. He was unable to accurately say how many times that he'd stabbed her because he didn't know, because he didn't stab her. They say that they'd found blood in the bathroom sink and asked why would there be blood in the sink. Michael doesn't know. So Detective Claytor is kind enough to provide him with the information, and he says, well, do you think that maybe you washed the knife off in there? And Michael says, I don't know. I completely blocked myself off. I wouldn't even know that I did it if she wasn't dead. The only way I know that I did this is because she's dead and because the evidence says that I did. You could find that someone else did it, and I pray to God someone else did, but I think it's too late for that. I think I did it. He says, I mean, if you find someone else did it, that would be the most glorious thing I've ever heard. And Claytor says, would you be surprised? And Mike says, yeah, I'd be surprised. But like I said, that would be glorious. And the detective says, are you pretty convinced? And Michael says, yeah, I'm pretty convinced. In 3 days, the police had managed to completely brainwash Michael into believing that he had murdered his own sister in a fit of rage and didn't remember doing it. They had repeatedly lied to Michael about evidence against him. They had turned him against the rest of his family. They had denied him access to his parents, to counselling. They had mentally tortured him until he was completely broken, and then they rebuilt him with the pieces that they handed him in order to fit their narrative. So to ask their suspect if he was convinced that he had killed someone is just mental.
It's terrifying.
It's shocking. Absolutely shocking. After he was done confessing, Detective Claytor pauses and he says to Michael, you know what, Mike? I'd like to shake your hand. And Michael says, thank you. And Claytor says, that's a very, very good thing you did. And Michael says, it was easy once I started. Thank you for getting me there. And Claytor says, you're welcome.
God.
Both detectives tell Michael that they have a lot of respect for him, being man enough to admit what he did. You've done exactly what you need to do now to get on with your life. Had you not said this tonight, I'd say you'd be gone, lost forever. They tell Michael he won't be going back to the Polinsky Centre tonight. He'll be taken to juvenile hall and await a lawyer and charges against him for the murder of his sister, Stephanie Crowe. After 6 hours, they end the interrogation. It is now 10:15 p.m. and Michael is taken to juvenile prison. Meanwhile, Michael's parents had been living in a state of limbo, not knowing when they would be able to see their children or get them back. They had been living with friends, and just after midnight that night, the phone rang. Michael's dad, Steve, answered it, and it was Detective Claytor. And they tell Steve that they've arrested a suspect. It's your son. Before Steve had time to gather any thoughts, they put Michael on the phone, and Steve asked his son if he killed Stephanie, and he says, I don't know, Dad. I don't know what to believe. He says, Michael, I want to hear you say it. I want you to say it with your mouth. Did you have anything to do with this? Did you murder Stephanie? And Michael says, I don't know. I guess you know that I did. They told me I did. And Steve says, what do you mean they told you? And Michael says, they kept telling me. He says, what? What do you mean? And Mike says, they kept telling me that I killed Stephanie for 2 days. I don't think that I did, but they said I did. I just don't remember. I don't know what to believe anymore. And Steve says, 2 days? What? No one even told us that they were questioning you. And Mike said, they said you knew. They said that you'd seen all the evidence and you knew that I did it. And his dad says, Michael, that's not true. And Michael says, they said you weren't coming back for me. They said that you never wanted to see me again. And his dad says, Michael, listen, I don't know what they've told you, but we haven't seen anything, okay? Nobody has told us anything. We never even said that we didn't want to see you. that we weren't going to come back for you. All we've been doing is waiting for you, waiting to get your sister and you back, like they told us we had to. And Mike says, Dad, I'm so sorry. They said that I can't remember, that I'm doing this on purpose, that I don't want to remember. I was there in that room all those hours. Everything made sense. But now it doesn't. And his dad says, Michael, why would you tell anyone? And he says, you don't know what it was like. They said they found blood in my room, that I could have blacked out, but wouldn't I remember? Eventually, Stephen and Cheryl go to see their son in prison. They talk with him and are absolutely convinced that he had nothing to do with Stephanie's murder. But police had his confession. And while Michael sat in prison awaiting his defense attorney, he missed his own sister's funeral.
Oh,
and
God.
Police weren't finished their investigation. They decided that some things Michael had said in his confession still didn't make sense. They also didn't know how Michael could have pulled off this crime without leaving any evidence behind, without waking anyone up, with disposing of the murder weapon. They keep going to this point. How could he have done it? They keep saying how. I don't know how he could have done it because there's no evidence. The detectives keep saying that.
Funny that.
How could he have done that? There was no, none of his clothes had blood on it, but he has done it, but I don't know how. So they decide that he must have had an accomplice. Or two.
Right.
Didn't Michael say that he had two friends that hadn't been very nice to Stephanie? It's time they took a closer look at Joshua Treadway and Aaron Hauser. These two boys are classmates of Michael's, and there is nothing about them to even remotely suggest that they are involved with Stephanie's murder.
Don't matter.
But they don't matter. Don't fucking matter. But Michael had mentioned in one of his interviews that his friend Aaron collected knives. So detectives paid him a visit. They are struck with how intelligent he is. He's 15, so he's a little bit older than Michael, and he's very careful when he speaks. He chooses his words before he says them. But detectives are just there at the moment to talk to him about Michael. Until that is, they bring up his big knife collection, and Aaron happens to tell them that one is missing. Detectives then pay Joshua a visit. Again, just to get some background information on Michael for now, to help build their case against him. And it turns out that Josh's parents aren't home. He is home with his younger brother. And detectives notice that on the table, next to a wood carving project, is a knife. Because it's a wood carving project and you need a knife to carve out a wood carving project. And this knife is around 5 or 6 inches long. And it's a knife that could be similar to the one that murdered Stephanie. While Josh is out the room, they point to the table and ask the younger brother, whose is that? Referring to the knife. And he tells them it's Josh's. And when Josh returns, they ask him the same question. Pointing to the table, they ask him, whose is that? So confused about what they're pointing at, and thinking that they're referring to the wood carving project, he tells police that it's his brother's. So police now think that he's lying. And knowing that Aaron is missing a knife that fits the description of the knife that they found in Josh's house, knowing that this knife could be the knife that killed Stephanie, could potentially match that knife, they question Joshua on this knife. And he admits that he stole it from Aaron because he liked it.
I like it.
So they arrest Josh on suspicion of theft and they bring him down to the station. His parents are aware of this, and his dad is even at the police station while he's being questioned. This 45-minute questioning turns into 2 mammoth interrogation, one of them being 10 hours and one of them being 12 hours. And this last 12-hour interrogation goes from 8 p.m. to 10 a.m. Joshua is denied food, he's denied sleep, he's denied water, he's denied access to his parents. And it's the same detectives interrogating him that interrogated Michael. So you know exactly what sort of techniques they are using. They tell Joshua that they know that this is the knife that killed Stephanie and it's in his possession. How did it get there? And if he can't produce an explanation as to how this knife got into his possession, then they are just going to have to assume that he is responsible for her death. They tell Joshua that they have spoken to Michael and Aaron, and they are both saying that Joshua killed her. So he needs to start explaining why he has this knife. So after 12 hours, exhausted, desperate for sleep, he tells police exactly what they want to hear. He, himself, Michael and Aaron killed Stephanie. He waited outside the house to be the lookout while Aaron held Stephanie in place and Michael stabbed her. They then washed the knife off in the sink, and it was given to Aaron, who later gave it to Joshua to hide. So this was enough to arrest Joshua and throw him in juvenile hall along with Michael. As soon as the boys were away from the detectives, they both recanted their confessions, saying that they had been forced to confess.
Yeah.
The police now pick up Aaron Hauser. They question him using the same techniques as the other two boys, but he's a very different character to Michael and Joshua, and he's angry that they would accuse him of Stephanie's murder because he knows 100% he had nothing to do with it, and he remains steadfast in this.
Good.
Outside the room, the psychologist that watched Michael's interrogation and Joshua's interrogation also watches Aaron. He describes Aaron as a Charles Manson individual with a high IQ. So what sort of child psychologist would watch these interviews and go, they're all right, that's acceptable?
Yeah.
However, Aaron does not confess.
Good.
He does, however, get lured into a hypothetical situation and ends up telling police how hypothetically he would have killed Stephanie. But they have Josh's confession, which places Aaron at the scene of the crime. So he's also arrested for the murder of Stephanie Crowe. Now, you might think that I very briefly skipped over these last two interrogations, and you would be correct, because they are just as awful as Michael's interrogation, and this episode would be horrendously long if I was to include all of that. So I will be doing a blam with all of the information on how they managed to persuade Joshua to commit to a murder that he didn't do and to implicate two of his friends. I will do a blam, and I'll include all of the interrogation in that blam. Because what was done to these boys was torture. They were children being interrogated for hours on end, being read their rights, but not fully understanding what it would mean for them to waive them. Because we're all of the assumption that if you remain quiet, you've got something to hide.
Yeah.
If you're being asked, did you kill this person, and you don't say anything, that implicates guilt. So all of these boys, not guilty, were happy to say, I'm not guilty.
Yeah.
So all three boys remained in juvenile prison while their defense attorneys worked out the best way to defend their clients. After seeing the interrogation tapes, they knew full well that they had a case of coerced confessions on their hands. But now they had a really tough job of having to convince a jury that their own clients were liars, essentially. The hardest part of a false confession is getting the jury to understand why these happen. No one in their right mind would ever confess to something that they didn't do. So why would you confess unless you actually did it?
Yeah.
You could sit there right now and say to me, I would never confess to a murder that I didn't do.
Yeah, and I would say that. Yeah.
And you would say that. And I'm sure Michael would have said that as well before his interrogation. At the hearing, the judge looked over all the evidence along with the defense attorneys as well. They all looked over all the evidence that the police had gathered, the whole none of it. She deemed that the confessions would not be allowed into evidence because of the promised leniency that was given to these boys. However, she did allow in the last 2 hours of Joshua Treadway's confession. Now, this was the part that he implicated the other boys in the murder.
Right.
This last 2 hours was the last 2 hours of a 12-hour interrogation. And she allowed that bit in. And she also said that the boys would be tried as adults.
Oh, shit.
Joshua's Treadway's attorney was a woman named Mary Ellen Attridge, and she was appalled by the judge's decision. And she said, fine, you know what? If you're going to allow in the last 2 hours of this confession, let's allow all the confession. Go on. Let's allow all of the video evidence in. Let's really show the jury how this confession was obtained. She also needed to go over all the evidence that the police had to try and point to another suspect. She found in the police's possession clothing belonging to another man that they had arrested the day of Stephanie's murder, Richard Tuite. On the 20th of January, 1998, the evening that Stephanie was murdered, police were called out to the same area that the Crowe family lived in. Several frightened residents had called 911 about a man acting strangely, knocking on houses, including the Crowes, peering into windows, and walking into homes through unlocked doors. When an officer turned up that night at the Crowes' neighbourhood, the houses, he actually went to the Crowes' next door neighbour's house after they had received another 911 call around 9:30 or 10 p.m. The officer claimed to have seen someone enter the Crowe home through one of the unlocked doors, and Richard Tuite was nowhere to be found. He was, however, picked up the morning of Stephanie's murder. Police found him dumpster diving and they took him back to the station for questioning. Richard Tuite was a 20-something-year-old young man. He was a transient of no fixed abode and a diagnosed schizophrenic with a massive history of mental health issues. Police didn't get much information out of him in his interview, but they did take his very stained clothing for testing and photographed him, much like they did to each of the Crowe family, scrutinising their bodies for any signs of defensive wounds. In these photos of Tuite's naked body, scratches can clearly be seen on his arm and neck. He also has a fresh cut to the palm of his hand, potentially from a knife. They did not run a background check on him. If they had of, they would have seen that he had plenty of previous arrests and charges, one of which was for stabbing someone.
For the love of Jesus.
Police described Richard as a bumbling prowler, someone that didn't have the mental capacity to pull off such a crime. There was no way that he could have snuck into the home without waking anyone up and carry out this murder. Hold in your anger. They released him without fingerprinting him because they forgot. However, they did go back a few days later and find him and then bring him back and fingerprint him. A few days after Stephanie's murder, while they were interrogating poor Michael, Richard was arrested again for peering into a motel room and cars in the parking lot because he said he was looking for the murdered girl's parents. He was let go. A few days later, he was arrested again for leering and stalking two teenage girls in a similar age to Stephanie. He was let go. 3 months later, the police did eventually test the red jumper that he'd been wearing that day, which was completely covered in stains. Only a very small section of this jumper was tested, which came back negative for any blood. However, when Josh's defense attorney, Mary Ellen Attridge, saw this jumper and its many stains, she ordered it be sent for testing. Meanwhile, the three boys sat in juvenile prison awaiting their trial. They had been in prison now for 8 months. The evening before the first day of the I think it was either the trial or the jury selection part of the trial, Mary Ellen Attridge gets a call with the results of the testing from Richard Tuite's clothing. A clear match for Stephanie's blood. And it turned out that Stephanie had a rare gene, which meant that there was 0% chance that this was anyone else's blood other than Stephanie's. The judge had no option other than to drop the charges on the three boys. 2 years after Stephanie's murder, police finally decide to charge Richard with the crime. Why they waited 2 years is beyond me, but it is said that they were embarrassed about their shitty detective work.
Well, so they should be.
In custody during the first day of jury selection, Richard Tuite, who the police had previously deemed a bumbling prowler incapable of slipping into the house undetected, slipped out of his handcuffs in the courtroom, walked past police officers and out onto the streets. It took police 3 days to find him. He was eventually convicted of Stephanie's murder and sentenced to 17 years in prison, for which he served half before being allowed a new trial where he was found innocent. So far, no one has been held accountable for Stephanie's murder, and the case remains unsolved, even though we all know it was Richard Tuite. But he was let out on a technicality. Now, I absolutely will be doing a blam on this episode to go through all those details that I skimmed over, because I will elaborate on the interrogation of Joshua Treadway and Aaron Hauser, and I will explain why Richard Tuite was acquitted, because it's absolutely mental.
Yeah, I need to know that.
So if you would like to hear those details, make sure that you subscribe, otherwise you won't be able to listen. Okay. One other thing as well, Chris McDonough, the one of the detectives, the CVSA analyzer who had no business interrogating Michael, who did interrogate Michael, actually has a YouTube channel and podcast currently called The Interview Room. And there is an episode which discusses this case. And in this episode, he's interviewing the defense attorney for Richard Tuite. Oh. And if you feel the way that I do about this case, please go and listen to it. And you can really get a better idea of how corrupt these people are. It's an infuriating listen as both men condemn these 3 boys and plead Richard Tuite's innocence.
Oh, really? Okay.
Absolute. They stand by what they did. Yeah, they positively say that it was the 3 boys that killed Stephanie, and it wasn't Richard. It couldn't have been Richard. Goodness.
Okay. I'll be interested to hear the blam and to find out a little bit more about why they're so convinced that it wasn't Richard.
Yeah, I will go through that, because it's a technicality. It's infuriating. It's mind-blowing. It's infuriating that people are allowed to get off in that sense when all the evidence clearly shows that it was him. It's baffling to me. And I know this has been a long episode, and I'm really sorry that it was a long episode, but I didn't feel like it was right to split it into 2 parts.
No, well, we had some time off, didn't we? So this is made up for it a bit. Yeah, but no, it's no, thanks for that, Poddy. That was
infuriating.
I can't even put it into words, but I just feel completely perplexed as to how this would be allowed to happen and why they would want that. I know they're like, let's tie this case up, get it done, put it away. But at what point do they really genuinely want to get the person that genuinely did that? Unless they, in their hearts, fully believe that he did do it.
I don't think there's anybody that can listen to those tapes and read this interrogation that could say it was Michael and he's lying. There is no one on this earth that would read that interrogation and say he definitely did it. This was a few years after John Bonet, and police kept saying to the family, this isn't going to be another John Bonet. We are going to solve this. So I think they were under a lot of pressure themselves to solve it.
I mean, it is very John Bonet-esque.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. They had a narrative, and they just squeezed everyone into this narrative. This is what we think happened. These are who we think did it. So let's make it fit. But yeah.
Goodness.
There you go. That's it. Let's the episode.
Well, I have some questions, but I feel that you will answer them in the blam.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. I will.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Poddy. What a great episode for the start of season 3. Whoop, 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 whoop.
All right, peeps.
Wicked. All right.
Well,
see you next time.
See you next time.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye. Nurse for us.
No.
Nurse.